Good afternoon and welcome to episode 11 of BuiltPlace's Housing Conversations. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Philip Barnes, who is UK Director of Land and Planning at Barratt, the house builder. Phil, good afternoon and thanks for joining me today. And clearly it's been a very busy week for planning in the UK, in England specifically. And we've seen the publication of the government's document yesterday, which is touted as a massive revolution in planning. And does that how does that sit with you? Is it a revolution or more of an evolution?
Well, firstly, good afternoon, Neil, and it's an absolute pleasure to be on. You've got to take your hat off to MHCLG. This is a document which is absolutely fizzing with ideas, but it is more of an evolution than a revolution. It's basing the new system on the current local plan system, but that is not to underplay the fact that it's it is chock full with new approaches and new ideas, some of which are extremely interesting and exciting, some of which look a little bit more challenging, a little bit more difficult. But yeah, it's been a busy couple of days. There's no doubt about that.
Well, thanks for taking the time out to talk to us today. So is there anything in there that you're particularly excited about that really kind of sits well with the house builder approach and the frustrations that you've had with the planning system in years and decades past?
Yeah, you're going to have to watch me, Neil, because I could speak for days on this document. So feel free to cut me off. But yeah, no, there are some really interesting, potentially exciting things in there. I mean, I would say for us, the fact it is building on the existing system is good, particularly when it is layering it on some fixed deadlines, like 30 months to prepare a local plan, fixed deadlines for preparing planning applications. Standard development control policies feels good for a house builder compared to similar type policies just replicated in local plans. Seems to be pretty clear that once housing need and requirement is set for a local authority, it has to be delivered. They can't just shirk it or pass it on to the neighbours. That looks good from a house building perspective. And it's very big. It's very big on design. I think you probably know, Barratt, we try to we place a high importance on good design, and it's talking about popular. It uses the words delivering designs which are popular. And from a Barratt perspective, we would say what we try to do, which is a brick-built, two-story, semi and detached product in the main, is very popular. And if that comes through into policy, we're embracing that potential.
Is there anything that concerns you at the moment? Clearly, there's still a lot of unanswered questions and detail that needs to be trawled through by the experts. But is there anything that jumps out at you that might be a frustration going forward?
I think you're spot on, Neil. There is a lot of it is still to be worked through. Indeed, in several places, it gives you different policy options and asks for your views on them after it's laid down the preferred approach. I think the new infrastructure levy, at first blush, probably need to read it a couple of more times. That does look quite challenging. In 2016, the expert group specifically looked at the current planning obligation system and felt that Section 106 and a SIL running alongside it was the best approach for quite practical reasons. What we're seeing now is the proposed abolition of Section 106 and in effect a nationally set infrastructure levy. And when I looked at the detail of that, I could see some practical problems with that, and some of the proposals which are purported to simplify it. I'm thinking, I'm not sure that will. There'll still be a need to set benchmark land values, plus there'll still be a need to set the landowner premium. Talks about a threshold for setting higher and lower infrastructure levy payments. That all looks quite complicated. I'm not saying it isn't doable, but there's going to have to be a lot of work going into that. And for Barratt, we're only ever into a viability discussion on about 10% of our sites. So, for us, it's not a big problem that needs solving. So that will be one thing. I think the new standard methodology, that, as someone who works for a national company, very, very interesting and important to know where we will and will be allowed to build houses and in what number. So, it's good to see the number going up to the 300,000, but to see it essentially just loading numbers onto London in terms of the requirement, I don't know. I mean, delivery at around about 28,000 in London, Greater London Plan requirement for 40, and a method that says the need is 93,000 a year. That feels like about 60,000 houses a year are just going to fall through cracks, rather than turn into houses for people in need. And then I think the final thing would be, again, the approach to Greenbelt. If you really want to make a dent into building more homes in areas of the greatest affordability issue, well, I think having an initial standpoint to protect the Greenbelt at all costs, that looks a bit challenging, and I think there's some more work to do on that. I mean, it's interesting that the changes to the method are to set a new need figure, but the document then goes on to say they're going to set a national requirement at every level, at each local authority. So I think that transition to sort of policy off need to policy on requirement when you're trying to protect Greenbelt is going to be interesting.
Yeah, it raises questions around what happens in particularly those areas surrounding London, particularly around the duty to cooperate, which I understand is no longer they're proposing to do away with it. And inevitably, when you look at existing local plans of planning authorities around London, you hit the topic of spill out demand from London, and we couldn't possibly deal with this ourselves, therefore we're just going to ignore it, and it becomes the 60,000 shortfall that you refer to. It effectively disappears into the ether, and I suppose one of the challenges there, and not just around London but in other places, is how that assessed need can be delivered across local authority boundaries, and that could be quite a big barrier to some areas meeting those targets.
Yeah, 100% agree. And you just think, I mean, the needs have gone broad. There's very few areas that have been cut with the new requirement, but I think there's a few areas around London is going, well, phew, we got off okay there because they're just loading up London to 93,000 rather than loading it onto us. And I think, I'm not sure that's the right way forward, but we'll see.
There's bigger challenges that I'm not going to expect you to answer today about, the future of London and urban living and things like that, which, we could, the method still uses household projections, which are very backward looking, and we almost certainly are in a period of quite different population change, and so how flexible the process will be to cope with that in coming years could be quite important in different locations.
Absolutely.
I mean, how does we've talked about the infrastructure levy replacing SIL in section 106, and it's proposed now that it will be paid at the end of the development. How does that sit with your planning and your assessment of risk when you're bringing sites forward?
Well, obviously that's one of the areas where you would say that was, that's on the face of it good for a house builder. Instead of having to accommodate the cost of SIL and finance the cost of SIL before you've got any revenue, the removal of that and the payment as you're selling and achieving revenue is obviously positive for a house builder. For a local authority, if there's a need to put infrastructure in order to support the release of a site, and they're not getting the infrastructure levy payments until later, I think there'd be a few local authorities looking at that as quite a challenge. Now, the document refers obliquely to tax increment financing and saying, well, you can lend against the anticipated revenues, but when you pay your income tax, you pay less when you earn less. And so, lending against a revenue stream that may go down, perhaps be a challenge for some authorities. But again, one of the elements that'll need to be thought through. It is an area of complication. This idea that there could be an underage and an overage on the infrastructure levy, depending on the market.
Yeah, and it is still a consultation document. And you mentioned there are alternative options provided within the consultation paper. And it struck me that actually if you ended up with a package that was based on the alternative options, you might possibly end up with a planning system that's worse than we have now, which is always a risk as well with these processes. So, there's inevitably there's going to be some politics involved as we move towards this actually becoming policy. And I suppose ultimately there still is the local politics of defining these your local area within these three categories that is still going to be a challenging process involving a lot of discussion with the public and landowners, house builders and planning authorities. It's certainly not a simple solution to get. House building is still a complex, difficult process where you have to manage risk, and part of that is ensuring that you've got a supply of land coming through. And there's been an awful lot of talk about land banking, and we've had the Letwin review and others. There's a talk about 1 million unimplemented planning permissions and things like that. But broadly, the analysis seems to suggest that there's not a problem with land banking in the market, and I would broadly agree with that. When you're looking at short-term land banks, there are kind of reasonable levels that you would need to ensure that there's a consistent flow through. Pre-planning market, we're lacking data, so we can't see what you guys have on your books, but we'll hopefully see some of that information get released in future years. But are the policies suggested, are they going to significantly alter your business model? I assume you're still going to need to have land banks to manage risk and ensure you've got the flow through of land to build the homes you want to build.
Yeah, I mean, we register all our options, Neil, and we describe our strategic land bank in our results presentation. So if you want to dig, you can find. But no, I mean, as we said earlier, it's building on the new system, on the existing system, and therefore you're still going to have a planning system which creates a scarce resource called development land. And once the planning system has created that resource, the people who own that, which is landowners, not house builders in the main, will then be seeking to maximize their value from that scarce and valuable resource. So there's nothing in this that says there is such a change that the way house builders do business needs to change. And Barratt is a return on capital, fast asset turn business. So as soon as we've made an investment in that valuable, scarce development resource, the whole business pivots to turning that into a house that we can sell and return our capital invested as quickly as possible. And so, when I see people saying, well, we're going to make the biggest investment we make, which is land, we're going to make that, and then we're just going to sit back and hope that that house prices will go up in value, and therefore we'll be better sitting on it than actually building houses. That just isn't something I recognize at all. In Barratt, you get a pat on the back when you go fast. You get something different when you go slow. So, and particularly at the moment when you're looking into uncertain economic conditions, the idea that we'd have paid for land and we'd be sitting back is just not something I recognize. And as you said, let when consider this in detail. We've done research in 2017 with Chamberlain Walker, showing quite openly and honestly how our business model works. And Litchfields have looked at this issue in their start to finish report, and only in February concluded it takes on average 4.2 years to get from pre-application to site on a larger site. So that's why there's more permissions than delivery, because it takes a long time to get through the process. So you need a thick buffer if you've got plans to grow your business. And I think secondly, if you get planning permission for 1,000 units, it'll yield over 10 years at about 100 units a year. It won't deliver you all 1,000 in the couple of years after you've bought it.
Yeah, and certainly, large sites have played a part in that kind of spread out in the extent of the time it takes. And one of the other factors that's frequently mentioned is resources in local authority planning departments and their ability to actually deal with this. And the document is asking us all to start using more technology and software and web-based maps, which is absolutely fantastic. But it will take time for those to be set up, and so we're looking, not just from the policy perspective, but also from the kind of the tech and just the tools that we have. We're looking at a period of time of uncertainty and change, even before you add COVID, the lockdown, and Brexit on top of that. And so it's clearly a challenging time for the economy as a whole. And so I was just wondering if you can talk about Barratt's experiences of the last few months and kind of maybe where you see it going over the next say 6 months or a year or so.
I mean, I don't think from Barratt would add an awful lot more to the participants you've had on this series so far. The market is strong. Our reservations year on year are higher at the moment than they were 12 months ago. We're watching closely how many of those end up into a completion, and so we'll be watching cancellation levels closely. But the market is strong. Our forward order book is strong. Pricing is where we'd expect it to be. Our cash position, despite being essentially closed down for 2.5 months, is still resilient. So Barratt is cautiously optimistic, I would say. We're certainly not ignoring the potential for a downturn, maybe Q4, maybe through 21. So we're obviously being cautious to ensure we maintain a resilient cash position with that uncertainty. The fundamentals are still, the fundamentals of interest rates, mortgage availability, government policy support, they're all still there for us. But when you look at the economic and housing market projections, we know we've got to keep a close weather eye on what's upcoming and be ready for it.
Yeah, I suppose one final topic is, and you mentioned mortgage availability. There's clearly some problems in mortgage availability in the wider market, particularly for first-time buyers at higher loan-to-value mortgages. I presume that Help to Buy equity loan at the moment is helping insulate the house building sector from some of those problems at the moment, and there was an extension on the build deadline just announced by government, but you're still looking at Help to Buy equity loan move to its new version from April, where there's going to be regional price caps and it's going to be limited to first-time buyers. Now, I suspect the first-time buyer limit won't have that much of an impact, because already I think 80% of buyers using the scheme were first-time buyers. But the regional price caps are going to have some interesting implications for the market, not least in the northeast of England.
Yes, I mean, it won't come as any surprise to you, Neil, to know that having just come out of a period where we've essentially lost 5,000-6,000 completions from what we would have done last year had it not been for COVID, and looking into some economically uncertain times, we think Help to Buy, which has demonstrably proven its ability to drive supply, should be maintained in its current form for at least another year. I think that would give a useful kicker on supply, because as you've absolutely said, in certain regions, the new regional caps in play after March 21, 182,000 in the northeast, 244,000 in the West Midlands. They look quite low, even if you're trying to deliver a reasonable first-time buyer product.
Yeah, so I suppose the first home policy, that's not going to replace the level of demand that we've seen through Help to Buy, and I suppose that there's a risk that actually it cannibalizes demand rather than adding to it. Have you got any thoughts?
I must admit, the detail of the first home policy seems to change every time I read it, but so I probably need to read that for a second time. But I do think you're right. I think Help to Buy definitely drives supply. I know what it does to our behaviours, and it'll drive up supply. Just a slight worry. I think the government needs to be alive to the fact that, first homes clearly are going to support the owner occupation agenda, which plays to what Barratt wants to deliver. But if it's at the expense of the new social rented delivery, that's something I think they'll want to keep their eye on.
Yeah. Well, Phil, thanks very much for joining us this afternoon. It's been absolutely fascinating, and I've held your time long enough. So thanks again, and brilliant to talk to you.
No, my pleasure. Thanks, Neil. Bye-bye.